For most of his life, Marcus Carter believed in keeping the peace. As a middle school science teacher in Lakeland, Florida, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. Day in and day out, he wrangled kids more interested in their phones than the periodic table, and somehow still managed to get a few of them excited about atoms and gravity. At the end of each long day, he came home to his sanctuary, a modest single-story brick house with a clean front lawn and a quiet driveway just wide enough for his old sedan. It wasn't much, but it was his, a place to grade papers, watch the game, and breathe. Then came Danielle Vanderholt. She lived next door, polished and sharp, always in a hurry. The first time Marcus saw her silver Lexus sitting squarely in his driveway, he figured it was a one-time mix-up. Maybe her guest needed to juggle cars and it just made sense in the moment. He let it slide. But it happened again. Then again. Always with a reason, dropping something off a delivery, just a minute. She'd flash a quick, dismissive smile, wave her manicured hand like it was all nothing. And Marcus, ever patient, didn't want to make trouble. But trouble has a way of finding a man when lines get crossed too many times. And soon Marcus would find himself at the center of a neighborhood battle, one that started with a driveway, but revealed something deeper. Something that couldn't be ignored. Not anymore. Marcus Carter had always been the kind of man who believed a little patience could solve most problems. He wasn't quick to anger. He didn't like confrontation. So when Danielle Vanderholt kept parking in his driveway time after time, he gave her the benefit of the doubt over and over again. At first, he told himself it was just temporary. Maybe she didn't realize it was an inconvenience. Maybe she didn't understand that driveway space, especially in a modest neighborhood like theirs, mattered. But as the weeks passed, it became clear Danielle didn't care. She never asked, never checked, just kept pulling in like she owned the space. And each time Marcus approached her, she'd meet him at the door with a practiced smile and some airy excuse. One evening he came home after a long day of wrangling, distracted seventh graders, his feet sore, his mind tired, and all he wanted was to collapse on the couch with a cold glass of sweet tea. But her Lexus was sitting in his driveway, again, this time parked crooked, right in the middle like it belonged there. He took a slow breath, walked up to her front door, and knocked. She answered like she'd been expecting him, glass of wine in hand, eyebrows slightly raised, lips curved in a condescending smile. "Oh, hey, Marcus, everything okay?" she asked, her voice syrupy. He gestured toward his driveway. "Your car's in my spot again." Danielle blinked like the idea had never occurred to her. "Oh, right. I had a package delivered and needed the room. You don't mind, do you?" "I do, actually," Marcus replied, his tone firm but measured. "I need you to stop parking there." She let out a dramatic sigh and tilted her head. "Marcus, I live right next door. It's not like I'm parking on a stranger's property." "You're parking on my property," he said, folding his arms. She gave a small, sharp laugh. "You're really getting worked up over a car sitting there for 5 minutes. It's not 5 minutes. It keeps happening." There was a long pause before she finally said, "Fine, I'll move it." And she did that time. But it didn't stop. Sometimes it was just her Lexus. Other times it was a friend's car, one Marcus had never seen before. He started leaving polite notes under the windshield wiper. They disappeared without response. He knocked again, but often no one answered. Then one evening, he pulled up to find not just one car, but two her Lexus and a sleek black BM, both wedged into his small driveway. His heart sank. That night, he didn't even bother knocking softly. He rapped hard on her door. When she finally opened it, her expression was pure annoyance, as if he were the one disturbing her peace. "Whose car is that?" he asked, pointing toward the BM. "Oh, my friend's. We're having a little get-together," she said lightly. "You weren't home, so I figured it wouldn't matter." "It does matter," Marcus said, his patience fraying. "This isn't a community lot. This is my home." She folded her arms and gave a smirk. "Well, if you'd said something earlier, I would have moved it." "I am saying something," he said, jaw tight. "Move the car." With a roll of her eyes, Danielle finally turned back inside, muttering, "No need to make it a whole thing." Marcus stood there on her porch, waiting 5 minutes, 10, 15. When 20 minutes passed and no one had come to move a thing, he went back inside his house, sat down at the kitchen table, and quietly pulled out his phone. He didn't call her. He didn't knock again. He started looking up the number for a local towing company. Because Danielle had made one thing painfully clear. she wasn't going to name him to stop. And he was finally done asking nicely. It was a quiet Friday evening when Marcus Carter finally reached his limit. He'd pulled onto a street after a long, draining week at school. The sun hung low behind the pines, casting gold across the rooftops. All he wanted was to kick off his shoes, fix something simple for dinner, and let the silence of home settle over him. But there it was again, Danielle's silver Lexus parked right in the middle of his driveway, like it had every right to be there. Marcus didn't get angry right away. Not visibly. He just stared at it for a moment, his hands still resting on the steering wheel. Then he eased his car to the curb, stepped out, and stood for a long while in the fading light, taking in the sight of that SUV. Something inside him had shifted. No more notes, no more door knocks, no more soft-spoken warnings. He took out his phone and calmly dialed the number he'd saved a week ago. "This is Marcus Carter," he said. "I need a car removed. It's in my driveway. Doesn't belong to me." The dispatcher didn't ask many questions, said someone would be there in 20 minutes. True to their word, the tow truck rolled up before the sky had even darkened. The driver, a middle-aged man with calloused hands and a steady gait, stepped down and nodded toward the car. "She's in your spot." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, handing him a copy of his property deed. "I'm the owner. That's my driveway." The man took one glance at the document, gave a firm nod, and got to work. It was fast, almost elegant. The hooks, the pulleys, the gentle whir of the winch. Within minutes, Danielle's Lexus was tilted off the ground, tires locked and ready to go. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching silently as the truck eased out of his driveway and turned down the street. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel cruel. He just felt settled, like a man who had finally drawn a line in the sand. He didn't have to wait long for the fallout. An hour later, just as Marcus was halfway through grading a stack of lab reports, there came a loud, furious pounding at his front door. Bam, bam, bam. He didn't rush. He stood slowly, stretched his arms, and walked to the entryway with quiet steps. When he opened the door, Danielle stood there in pajama pants and flip-flops, hair tousled, phone clutched in one shaking hand. "Where is my car?" she snapped. Marcus tilted his head calmly. "The one parked in my driveway without permission." "It's been towed. You did what?" She shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You heard me," he said plainly. "You wouldn't stop parking in my driveway, so I had it removed." Danielle let out a sharp, bitter laugh and stepped closer. "Oh, you are going to regret this. Do you even know who I am? I'm on the HOA board. I have connections." Marcus blinked slowly, unfazed. "Good for you. Your car's at Sunshine Towing off Orange Blossom Trail. They'll be open tomorrow morning." Then without another word, he shut the door. Gently, firmly. But outside, Danielle wasn't done. She stayed out there for nearly 10 minutes, pacing back and forth on the porch, yelling to no one in particular, threatening him under her breath. She even pulled out her phone and called the police. When the officers arrived, Marcus met them at the door, calm as ever. He handed over the same deed he'd shown the tow truck driver. They read it, nodded, and turned to Danielle. "Ma'am, it looks like he had every right to tow the vehicle. If you want it back, you'll need to cover the impound fee." Her face flushed a deep, angry red, but she said nothing more. And as the patrol car pulled and the night finally quieted, Marcus stood inside his home, tired, steady, and quietly resolved. He knew this wasn't over, but it was a start. After the tow, Marcus hoped, maybe even expected, that things would settle down. Danielle had been embarrassed, sure, but surely she understood now that he wasn't going to keep letting her cross that line. But peace was not what came next. Instead, Danielle took the quiet route, the passive-aggressive route. It started with a note, bright red marker taped to his front door like some kind of official warning. "This is a community and we should all try to be more considerate of our neighbors." Marcus read it once, then dropped it straight into the trash without a second thought. He'd been considerate more than once more than most would have been. Next came the HOA letters, one after another. The first one claimed his potted ferns didn't meet community aesthetic standards. Marcus laughed when he opened that envelope. Those same ferns had been sitting on his porch for 2 years without a single complaint. Then came another letter. His garbage bins were left out too long. Another after that, mailbox paint fading. He stopped laughing after the third one. This wasn't random. Danielle was behind it, using the HOA like a weapon, filing nonsense reports. and hiding behind formal language and board policies. And still, Marcus stayed calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't retaliate, just made notes, kept copies, and waited. But the worst came one evening, just as the sun was dipping below the rooftops and Marcus was out front watering his lawn. It had been a long day, but he liked this time just in him, the quiet hum of sprinklers, the last breath of warmth before the night settled in. That's when a white security SUV rolled up, lights flashing. A tall man in a crisp uniform stepped out, adjusting his belt like he was gearing up for something serious. "You live here, sir?" he asked, clipboard in hand. Marcus paused, hose still in hand. "Yeah." "Why?" "We got a call about some suspicious activity," the officer replied. Marcus followed the man's eyes and knew instantly. There across the lawn, standing on her porch with her arms crossed and that same smug expression, Danielle. She gave a polite little wave, pretending she wasn't the one behind it. Marcus took a slow breath. "Suspicious?" he asked evenly. The officer cleared his throat. "Just checking in. Nothing personal." "Let me guess," Marcus said, glancing back at Danielle. "Someone called because I was out here watering grass." The officer looked uncomfortable now. "Look, sir, I don't make the calls, I just respond." Marcus nodded. "Right. Well, you can let her know I'm not going anywhere." The officer gave a faint nod and backed off, climbing into his SUV without further word. But Marcus wasn't about to let this slide. He turned and walked straight up to Danielle's porch, calm but firm. She opened the door before he even knocked. "Oh, hey, Marcus. Everything okay? I saw security. Hope it wasn't anything serious." He folded his arms. "You know exactly why they were here." She feigned surprise. "Reggie, no need to be rude. We all have a duty to look out for the neighborhood." He held her gaze. "You've been trying to provoke me for weeks. The notes, the complaints, the security call. You want a reaction." Danielle tilted her head, smiling just a little. "Now, why would I do something like that?" Marcus didn't blink. "Because I didn't let you park in my driveway. Because I told you no." She didn't respond right away, just kept that faint, smug smile like it was some kind of shield. But Marcus had changed. The man she thought she could push around was no longer standing in front of her. He leaned in slightly, voice calm and low. "I gave you more chances than you deserve, Danielle, but you keep pushing, so now let's see what happens when I push back." And for the first time, her expression faltered. Just for a moment. But it was enough, because Marcus wasn't angry. He wasn't rattled. He was steady. And Danielle, she had no idea what was coming. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Lakeland, the kind of day made for grilling laughter and folding chairs in the driveway. Marcus Carter had just come back from the gym, whistling softly to himself, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. His family was on their way over for a cookout, something he hadn't hosted in a while. For once, things felt simple, until he turned the corner onto his street. There it was again, Danielle's silver Lexus, parked bold as ever in the center of his driveway. Not only that, it was blocking his garage door, leaving no room to pull in. Marcus stared for a moment, not even surprised, just disappointed. She had learned nothing. He eased his car to the curb, turned off the ignition, and sat for a long breath, letting the anger pass by like a slow-moving storm. He wasn't going to knock, wasn't going to argue. Not this time. He picked up his phone and made a familiar call. Sunshine Towing, came the voice on the other end. "This is Marcus Carter," he said calmly. "I need a vehicle removed. Same location as before." The dispatcher chuckled softly. "Let me guess. Same car too." "You got it. We'll be there in 15. Marcus hung up and smiled. No rage, no stress, just resolve. He popped the trunk, pulled out 2 folding chairs, and set them up on his porch. Then he sat arms crossed, waiting as the warm breeze drifted across his face. It was almost peaceful. 15 minutes later, the tow truck came rumbling down the street. The driver, same one as before, stepped out, adjusted his gloves, and took in the scene. "We doing this again?" he asked. Marcus nodded toward the car. "Looks like it." The man shook his head with a grin. "Some folks just don't learn." With practiced ease, he backed up to the Lexus, dropped the lift, and started strapping down the tires. That's when the front door next door slammed open. Danielle came charging out like she'd caught someone stealing her furniture. Her silk robe flapped behind her, hair half-curled, voice high and sharp. Stop! What are you doing? Marcus didn't even stand. He leaned back in his chair, took a sip from his water bottle, and watched. The driver kept working silent and focused. Danielle marched up the sidewalk and stopped in front of Marcus, face flushed and furious. You called the tow truck again. He arched a brow. You parked in my driveway again. I have guests. There was no street parking. Not my problem, he said plainly. You're being petty, Marcus. I told you I would have moved it. He sighed, cool and composed. You've told me that before, Danielle, more than once. And yet, here we are. Her face turned a deep red, her fists clenched at her sides. You don't understand what you're doing, she hissed. I have connections. I can make your life very difficult. Marcus chuckled, not mocking, just tired. Oh, Danielle, he said, standing now, brushing off his jeans. I don't think you understand what's happening here. He gestured toward the street. She turned and saw it, her Lexus already halfway up the tow ramp, its wheels locked tight. Her voice cracked into a shriek. You're going to regret this. Marcus took a quiet step closer, voice low. No. Danielle, you are. Then he turned and walked back to his porch as his brother's car pulled up, kids waving from the back seat, the smell of marinated ribs in the air. Hugs, laughter, the sound of his world moving forward. Behind him, Danielle stood alone on her lawn, her Lexus vanishing down the street once again. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end. Not with someone like her. By Monday morning, Danielle Vanderholt was no longer just angry, she was on a mission. Not one of reflection or apology, but retaliation. She knew the second tow had made her look foolish, and instead of backing down, she went all in. This time, she didn't just want to get even with Marcus, she wanted the whole neighborhood to turn against him. It started with an email from the HOA board, a vague, carefully worded message sent out to the entire community. Recent disputes between neighbors have escalated unnecessarily. We remind residents to handle conflicts with courtesy and open dialogue. There were no names, but everyone knew. Danielle was behind it, and everyone knew who she was talking about. The next day, laminated flyers appeared taped to mailboxes up and down the street. Is this the kind of community we want? Do we tow our neighbors instead of talking to them? Marcus found one on his own mailbox. He read it once, shook his head, and peeled it off. She was really doing all this over a driveway. But something surprising happened. The neighborhood didn't rally behind her. His phone buzzed later that morning with a text from Ron across the street. Saw the flyer. What the hell is wrong with her? Then one from Janice, a teacher he'd worked with years ago who lived around the corner. She tried to fine me $200 for wind chimes last year. We've all had enough. One message made Marcus laugh out loud. If she parks in your driveway again, I'll split the tow fee with you. Turns out Danielle's behavior wasn't new. It had just never been challenged before. People had stories. She'd fined a neighbor's teenage nephew for wearing a hoodie, reported a woman for planting sunflowers instead of HOA-approved shrubs, turned in another for hosting a birthday party that disrupted visual harmony. She hadn't ruled the neighborhood with kindness or fairness. She ruled with petty power. Now that power was slipping away. When the monthly HOA meeting came around, Marcus decided to attend. Normally he skipped those, but this time felt different. He walked in early and took a seat directly across from Danielle, who sat stiffly at the table with her fellow board members. She didn't look at him. The meeting began with the usual talk, budget updates, landscaping schedules, reminders about trash bin placement. Then a pause. One of the board members, a man named Alan with silver hair and a worn leather binder, cleared his throat. We need to address a formal complaint filed regarding misuse of HOA authority and private property rights. Danielle sat up straighter, ready to pounce, assuming the complaint would be in her favor. But Alan continued. The complaint is against board member Danielle Vanderholt. The room shifted. Danielle's head snapped toward the table. Excuse me, another board member. A woman in her 60s named Linda sighed. Danielle, we've had multiple reports. You've used HOA resources to target a resident personally. False security calls, unauthorized communications, and now public harassment. That's ridiculous, Danielle said, her voice tight. I'm the one being harassed. Alan shook his head slowly. We've heard from over a dozen residents. This isn't just one dispute. It's a pattern. Danielle looked around the room, searching for support. But the faces that met hers were quiet, tired, done. We're not taking sides, Linda said gently. We're standing with the community. Danielle's mouth opened, then closed. She had nothing left to say. For years, she'd used the board like a crown, walking the neighborhood like it was hers to rule. But now that crown was slipping, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply sat, arms folded, quiet and steady. Danielle was losing her grip, and she knew it. But she wasn't finished, not yet. Because when power starts to slip, some folks hold on tighter, even if it means grabbing for trash. The day Danielle moved out was quiet. No goodbye, no last words, just a moving truck, a few hired hands, and a porch that had gone still. Marcus stood at his window watching as the last of her things disappeared. No anger, no victory dance, just a deep, quiet exhale. It was over. There were no more flyers, no strange letters in the mailbox, no security cars pulling up while he watered his lawn. Just the sound of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the warm hum of Florida air. Neighbors who once kept their distance now waved as they walked past. One even brought him a peach cobbler with a note that simply read, "Thank you for standing up." Marcus didn't need recognition. He wasn't trying to make noise. He just wanted his peace back. And now pulling into his driveway each evening, no cars blocking the way, no tension in his chest, he finally had it. It doesn't take shouting to stand your ground. Sometimes doing the right thing looks like holding the line calmly, steadily when someone keeps pushing it. And when you do, it can give others the courage to do the same. You don't always see the change right away, but it grows quietly like roots beneath the soil. If this story touched something in you, reminded you of a moment, or gave you a little hope, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to share your thoughts or just say hello. And if you'd like more stories like this, real stories about dignity, quiet strength, and everyday justice, I'd be honored to have you along. Take care, friend. You're not alone out there.